Dajihan, hi guys, it's Janae and welcome back to my channel, and today I am continuing the read along for ErHa. I'm so excited, I'm so hot, it's so warm today, oh my word. But yeah, I'm excited. We are here, as I mentioned now earlier, but we are still going to be doing the 2 hours like normal. I really want to stay on this kind of like trajectory so that we can finish the book as quickly as possible and move on to the next one. I just want to be very efficient with this if possible because I'm really enjoying it, and I'm really curious about how everything goes. So anyway, sorry, I am so incredibly hot, and yet I have tea here with me. So okay, just quickly before we do get into it, I do want to wait like a few minutes just in case anyone else wants to join. But yeah, just the rules for the chat are there. I'm not very like particular about it. It's just, you know, feel safer to put it up there just in case anyone is wondering. And also, again, yesterday wasn't the best in terms of my ability to read, so I apologize if today is similar. But my voice, I think, is still kind of like trying to recover a little bit. Hi everyone. Wow. So quick. Okay, but yeah, also just let me know as always about the audio. It should be fine, but it's always good to get confirmation. And again, I might get some words wrong. I noticed yesterday I was struggling with quite a few words. That is the frustration of not having English be my first language, unfortunately. So okay. For anyone who is going to be reading along, we are on page 255, and I would really like to be able to get to page 300 by the end of this. I'm not sure how realistic that goal is, but we're gonna try. But I also have somewhere to be, so I'm not gonna like extend myself too much past the 2 hour mark. So that's the thing. But anyway, okay, yay, the audio is fine, everyone is here, so I guess we are good to go. Yeah, and I do have tea and water here. I might make myself some coffee when we take the 10-minute break, we shall see. Oh, and I need a pillow. Okay, so just to quickly recap for anyone who maybe hasn't had a chance to watch yesterday's, we had Chu Wanning accidentally hitting Shimei with his whip when he was furious with a scumbag of a master of a household, shall we say. And yeah, now there's kind of just the fallout of that. So, go take care of your face and stop the bleeding. I'll take her inside. There was still a big Shi character hung in the eldest Chen son's room. Everything had happened so fast that they'd probably forgotten to take it down in their rush. At this time, with Chimbo Huan already nothing more than powder, it seemed like a profound mockery. Madame Chinyao was collateral damage in this ridiculous avarice-riddled farce. What would she choose to do when she woke? As a commoner, she wasn't as tenacious as Shimei. Chu Wanning drew out the poisonous blood and fed her a pill in silence. The whole time, MORAN stood to the side holding a basin of water and handing over towels, but the two of them did not speak to one another, did not so much as look at one another. As he was leaving, Chu Wanning's indifferent gaze swept past the wall before catching on something. He took a close look at the poem hanging on it. The columns of letters were written in regular script, neat and upright. The ink hadn't been dry for long, and the edges of the paper had not yet begun to yellow. Written on it was, "Pairs of rosy soft hands, jug of wine sealed in yellow. Verdant spring throughout the city, willows swaying behind the palace walls. Harsh eastern gales, happiness short-lived. One cup of melancholy Many years of solitude. This was wrong, wrong, wrong. Spring returns, lovely still, figures wasting away. Tear trails from reddened eyes, silken handkerchiefs soak through. Falling peach blossoms, empty pavilion upon the pond. Vows of affection enduring, letters of love unsent. All that remains is nothing, nothing, nothing. Chu Wanning's heart felt suddenly heavy. The writing was neat and careful, and it was signed Chimbohon. The 3 characters of his name were glaringly conspicuous. Chen Gongzi had married the daughter of the Yao family against his own wishes, and he had been forced to keep the misery in his heart to himself. Had he spent the final days of his life standing by the window, brush in hand, helpless to do anything but transcribe Chai Tuo Feng, an ode to loss and partings? Chu Wanning didn't want to remain at the Chim Manor even a moment longer. Ignoring the searing pain in his shoulder, he turned and left. Yeah, 'cause I keep forgetting that this poor man is still completely injured and everyone is just treating him like he's some kind of amazing immortal who should feel no pain. Oh goodness, okay, this is not going well. Chu Wanning and Chimay were both injured and unfit to ride back to Sishun Peak straight away. Moreover, Chu Wanning especially disliked traveling by sword, and so they decided to spend the night at an inn. This way, they could also go take a look at the temple the next day to ensure that things would be properly taken care of. Even though the demons and corpses had been pulverized by Chu Wanning's wind technique, it was only their bodies that had been destroyed, not their spirits. There was no harm in staying a few days to make sure that nothing had slipped off to continue causing trouble. Chu Wanning walked ahead in silence, his 2 disciples following behind him. Chimay seemed to have remembered something. "Aran, the clothes you and Shizun are wearing. What's going on?" Oh my word, this poor man still doesn't know that he was almost wed to someone. That's kind of messed up, but this book doesn't claim not to be. Moran was taken aback before realizing that he and their Shizun were still wearing wedding robes. Okay, but isn't Chimay also wearing a wedding robe as well? Anyway, he was deathly afraid that Chimay might misunderstand and hurriedly made to take them off. The illusion from before, don't think too much of it. Halfway through his words, he took another look and realized that since Chimay had also been dragged through the ghost wedding, he too was wearing wedding robes. It was just that his had a different design and didn't look too recognizable due to the rips and tears. But no matter what, they were wedding robes. Standing side by side with Chimay like this, he could imagine that it was Chimay whose hand he had held back in the ghost mistress's illusion, with whom he had bowed, with whom he had shared wine. Suddenly, he didn't want to take the robes off anymore, and he could only stare at Chimay in a daze. Chimay smiled warmly. "What is it? You didn't finish your sentence." "It's nothing," Moran mumbled. Chu Wanning was a few steps ahead of them. It was unclear how much he'd heard, but he stopped and turned around. The sky was starting to brighten. After a night of commotion, the first light of daybreak emerged over the horizon, the sun crimson like a torn and bleeding heart struggling out from the dark abyss to paint the skies in splendid color. I'm projecting, I'm pretty sure, but it feels like that is actually talking about Chu Wanning's heart, and I can't get the image out of my head. Okay. Chu Wanning stood, backlit, at the end of a long night grew bright as the rising sun lit the clouds. He stood in profile, his wedding robes red like blood. The sunrise cast a golden halo behind him, blurring the expression on his face. Spiritual energy surged forth, ripping the wedding robes to pieces. Fragments of red fluttered like so many petals of wilting high-tongue blossoms. The wind picked up, scattering the pieces everywhere. What, and he just stood naked there? I'm assuming not. I'm assuming that magically he's going to be wearing his normal robes. The white robes beneath fluttered in the wind along with his inky black hair, blood on his shoulder, pieces of fabric in the wind. The blood stain where he had been injured while he was protecting Moran was all the more vivid and conspicuous on those white robes. A long while passed before Chu Wanning sneered austerely, as if in ridicule. "Moyeu, what is there between you and me to be misunderstood?" So much that I can't even get into it right now. Moyeu was what he called Moran when he was angry, the term of address cold and unfamiliar, distant, with no hint of warmth. Moran choked, caught unaware, and had nothing to say. Chu Wanning turned and walked away. There was no one around at this hour. He walked ahead by himself as the earth and sky seemed to blur together. His harsh, contemptuous look fell apart as soon as he arrived at the inn room and closed the door. Chu Wanning gritted his teeth, pain clear on his face as he lifted a hand to touch his shoulder. Am I just gonna constantly be crying because of Chu Wanning and the fact that he's always suffering alone in silence? The ghost mistress's body was a kind of celestial form, her claws no lesser than Tian Wen. Both were extremely powerful weapons. His entire shoulder was torn up, but there had been no time to take care of it during the demonic onslaught. By this point, it had become infected and was beginning to fester. Oh, great. The pain was unbearable. As he stood in the room, Chu Wanning exhaled slowly and tried to take off his robes, but the fabric stuck to his skin where the blood had already dried. The tug sent bolts of pain through his body. I'm getting chills because the thing is, I remember when I was in grade 8, I fell and skinned open my knee, and there was a lot of dirt on it. And it was like right before my mom came to pick me up, so I didn't have time to like tend to it or anything. She picked me up, we went home, and I had to try and get the dirt out of the wound, but by that time like it had already kind of like stuck in, so it was very painful, and I can't help but think of this while hearing that description. I probably shouldn't have shared that though, I'm so sorry. Because if anyone is like me, then they also don't like the sound of people describing their pain. Okay. Where am I? I have no idea. Moran's room was right next door. The inn was hardly soundproof, and Chu Wanning didn't want anyone to know, so he bit down on his lip and ripped the cloth off in one ruthless motion. That's just great. Chu Wanning let out a stifled grunt, then slowly let go, blood on his teeth and lips where he had bitten too hard. He gasped for breath, his face completely devoid of color, his body covered in cold sweat. He lowered his long lashes, which trembled slightly as he looked down to take in the damage. It wasn't too bad, still manageable. Holding on to the table for support, he slowly lowered himself into the chair. Bit by bit, swallowing the pain, he wiped the wound clean with his uninjured hand, using the water and towel he had instructed the inn attendant to bring. Then, with a sharp knife, he cut away the dead flesh. After that, he applied a salve made by Madame Wang. Finally, Slowly, and with great difficulty, he wrapped the bandages around her shoulder by himself. He wasn't used to showing weakness in front of others. He had gone through this kind of pain many times before, and every time he had gotten through it on his own. Can someone just wrap this man up and bubble wrap and be done with it? An injured animal would find a place to hide and lick its wounds. Sometimes Chu Wanning felt like he was no different from those beasts, and that the solitary existence would probably continue in the future as well. He knew he was unlikable, so he didn't want to beg pitifully for anyone's help. He had his dignity. Okay. But when he took off his robes, a brocade pouch fell to the floor. The red satin was embroidered with flowers of a silk tree. His fingers shook from pain as he slowly opened it. Inside were 2 locks of hair, corded together, his and Moran's. Chu Wanning's mind went blank for a moment. He wanted to hold the pouch to the candle flame and burn it, along with its ridiculous contents. But even after a time, he couldn't bear to do so. Guys. Intertwining their hair, new husband and wife, ensure their love shall ne'er be unwound. He could almost hear the golden boy and jade maiden's quiet giggles. Chu Wanning was unaware of the throbbing deep in his own heart, and loathed himself all the more for it. Oh, sorry, I read that wrong. Chu Wanning was aware of the throbbing deep inside his own heart and loathed himself all the more for it. He clenched the He clenched the soft pouch tightly in his hand and slowly closed his eyes. He couldn't accept these feelings, which he had long held towards Moran. Okay, we shall discuss it in a bit. His only wish was that he could dig out his own heart and cut out the despicable thoughts inside, tear, rend, and throw them away. Where was his decency, his propriety? Was MERHOFER someone he ought to think about in such a way? What kind of teacher was he truly? Truly, he was worse than a beast. Tap, tap, tap. All of a sudden, several knocks came from the door. Chu Wanning was in the middle of berating himself and startled, his eyes opening wide as he hurriedly tucked the brocade pouch away in his sleeve, his face settling back into an ill-tempered cast. Who is it? Shizun, it's me. Moran's voice came from outside, and Chu Wanning's heartbeat sped up a little. Can I come in? Okay, let's just unpack that for a second before we move right along to the next chapter. I know I'm like trying to speed through the pages today, but the mere fact that we're only now getting confirmation of it, but at the same time we're also already getting confirmation of it, like it feels too soon and so late at the same time. It's so strange. Oh. Like, because from my side, I've kind of been viewing his actions through that lens already, but to kind of have confirmation that, yes, we can view his actions through that lens because the character himself is aware of his feelings, is gonna add another level of pain to this that I don't think I was fully prepared for. So, yay for that. Let me just drink a little more. Okay. Are you guys surviving? I don't know if I am. Chapter 25, this venerable one really can't stand him. Yeah, Moran, keep telling yourself that. Chu Wanning was silent for a long while, his face full of doom and gloom. For the entirety of that silence, the words, "Get the hell out," were stuck in his throat until, at length, they reluctantly came out as, "Get the hell in." Okay, that's quite funny. I feel I feel like everything in this book is to add another layer of pain. Yeah, basically. Eh? Your door isn't locked? Moran was trying to make up with him after the entire day of playing Cold War, so he pushed the door open and strolled in as if nothing was wrong. Chu Wanning glanced at him from where he sat by the table, no emotion on his face. If he spoke honestly from his heart, Moran was indeed good-looking. He brightened the whole room with his mere presence. Guys, I don't know if I'm going to be able to handle Chu Wanning gushing about Moran in his own weird way. The youth's supple skin almost seemed to glow, and the corners of his lips held a natural curve, such that he looked like he was smiling even when his mouth had a neutral set. Chu Wanning kept his composure firmly under control as he moved his gaze away from Moran and lowered his long lashes, raising a hand to extinguish the stick of incense on the table. "What are you doing here?" he asked impassively. "I came to check on your injury." Moran cleared his throat. Then his gaze landed on Chu Wanning's shoulder and he paused. "You've already taken care of it." Chu Wanning said mildly. Moran was speechless. Is it bad of me that I'm already looking forward to Moran seeing past the cold facade that Chu Wanning is known for? It was true that he held a grudge against Chu Wanning, and that he was also mad at him for hitting Shimei. But Moran had calmed down, and it wasn't like he didn't have any conscience at all. Hate was one thing, but he hadn't forgotten how Chu Wanning's shoulder had been injured. Inside that stifling coffin, Chu Wanning had held him tightly in his arms and used his own body to block the ghost mistress's claws. He had refused to let go even while his whole body shook from the pain. Moran definitely loathed Chu Wanning, but for some reason, a bunch of other complicated feelings were always mixed in with the loathing. He's so oblivious on my soul. He was a crude person who had not received an education in his youth. Even though he'd studied and somewhat made up for it later on, he had a hard time wrapping his head around many more delicate matters, especially those relating to emotions. Okay, that's actually fair. For example, when it came to Chu Wanning, Moran had scratched his head and mulled it over for a long time, but he just couldn't figure out what emotions he felt towards him. He only recognized simple feelings, like, dislike, hate, happiness, unhappiness. Unhappiness? I guess technically it's a word, but I don't think I often see it used. But if several emotions blended together, they would give the brilliant and powerful Emperor Ta Xinjun vertigo, making him see stars. This man is so ridiculous. Okay, I cannot continue laughing. I need to read. I don't get it. It makes no sense. What is this? Save me. Ow, my head. So Moran simply didn't bother to think about it. He didn't care to waste that kind of energy on anyone but Shimei. Oh, inwardly, he put the earlier incident on Chu Wanning's tab and secretly plotted to repay him twice over whenever he got the chance to settle the score. But at the same time, he felt guilty. He'd warred internally with himself before ultimately knocking on Chu Wanning's door. He didn't want to owe him anything, but Chu Wanning was even more headstrong than he had thought. Moran stared at the pile of blood-stained bandages on the table, the crimson-colored water in the wash bowl, and the knife that had been casually tossed aside, bits of bloody flesh clinging to its tips. He felt a headache coming on. Yeah. Just how had Chu Wanning managed to treat his own injury? Had he really just cut unblinkingly into the dead flesh around his wound with his own hand, just like that? Moran's scalp sorry. Moran's scalp went numb. Where am I, damn? Went numb just thinking about it. Was this guy even human? He thought about how, when he'd cleaned Shimei's wound earlier, Shimei had whimpered softly from the pain, tears springing to his eyes. For all that Moran disliked Chu Wanning, he couldn't help but mentally bow to him. The Yuheng elder was indeed boss as hell. Impressive, truly impressive. Moran stood there for a bit, then broke the silence first. He lightly coughed twice, toeing the floor, and mumbled awkwardly, "Earlier, at Chimmariner. Sorry, Shizun." Chu Wanning said nothing. Moran stole a glance at him. "I shouldn't have yelled at you." Chu Wanning continued to ignore him, face indifferent as always. He'd never have said it, but deep inside he did feel wronged. Moran walked over. Only up close did he see that Chu Wanning had made a mess of the bandages, the gauze wrapped around her shoulder like he was tying a crab for market. Okay. Then again, what could he expect from someone who didn't even know how to do his own laundry? Yeah. Moran sighed. "Shizun, don't be mad anymore." That's a lot to ask, I'm just gonna say. "Which of your eyeballs saw me being mad?" Chu Wanning shot back angrily. Moran wisely kept his mouth shut. Moments passed. "Shizun, that's not how you bandage wounds." Another tart retort. "You think you know better than me?" Moran stayed silent, but lifted his hand, wanting to redo the bandages for Chu Wanning. Then he looked at his expression and hesitated again. He had gouged the probability of getting slapped in the face for daring to touch him. It was quite high. The hand lowered, then raised. This repeated several times. Chu Wanning grew irritated and shot him a sideways glare. "What, you want to hit me or something?" Moran did indeed want to hit him, but not right now. He grinned in exasperation and reached out to press his hand against Chu Wanning's shoulder. Consequences be damned. Dimples appeared on his cheeks. "Here, Shizun, I'll help you redo the bandages." Chu Wanning at first wanted to refuse, but Moran's warm fingers were already on him, and his mouth suddenly felt excessively dry. His lips moved slightly, but in the end he said nothing and just let Moran do as he wanted. Moran unwrapped the gauze, layer by layer, each layer soaked through with blood, until the 5 spine-chilling holes were revealed. The mere sight of them made Moran shudder. This damage was much worse than the cut on Shimei's face. Moran stared for a bit, and then, for some reason, even he himself didn't understand, asked softly, "Does it hurt?" "No, it does not." Chu Wanning, long lashes downcast, only said lightly, "Not too much." "I'll be gentle," said Moran. Chu Wanning didn't know where his own mind was going, but his earlobes turned a bit red, and he got mad at himself again, thinking he must be losing his mind to be entertaining such absurdities. I mean, my mind went there, but it's funny that his mind also did. His expression grew stiffer, his mood even worse, and he muttered dryly, "Do as you will." The candle flame crackled, but its dim yellow light, Moran could see that the medical salve hadn't even been applied to some parts of the wound. He was sincerely speechless. It could only be by some kind of miracle that Chu Wanning had managed to live to this day. "Shizun? What happened at the Chim Manor today? Why did you beat them up?" Moran asked while applying the salve. Chu Wanning was silent for a moment before answering. I was angry, that's all. What made you angry? Moran asked. Chu Wanning hadn't felt like bothering his junior right now, so he kept the tale brief as he told Moran about Lu Xianqian. Moran shook his head when the account was complete. That was silly of you. Something like that, no matter how mad it makes you, you still shouldn't have confronted them in that way. If it was me, I'd just make some stuff up, fake the exorcism, then dust my hands off and leave. Let things run their course. You gotta adjust for situations sometimes, you know. Look at you, making such a big mess over over some worthless wench. Moran, I respectfully disagree with that assessment. And you even accidentally hit Chimay. Moran caught himself halfway through the rant. He shut up and watched Chu Wanning. He had been too focused on doing the bandages and had forgotten himself for a moment there, unwittingly speaking to Chu Wanning in an impudent tone of his 32-year-old self. Chu Wanning had clearly noticed it too. He was glaring inhospitably at Moran from the corner of his eye, the gaze alone conveying that familiar line, I'm going to whip you to death. He was still scrambling to think of an excuse when Chu Wanning spoke first. He said impassively, I do think I want... Oh, sorry. Do you think I wanted to hit Chimay... That's not what he said. That's what I thought. Do you think I wanted to hit Shi Mingjing? Sorry, I forget that he doesn't refer to Chimay as Chimay. As soon as Chimay was mentioned, reason left Moran's brain, and willfulness took over. Even his tone grew prickly. Did you not hit him? No, he said he didn't want to hit him. There's a difference, Moran. Chu Wanning regretted the strike too, but his face was thin, and he was mortified, so he scowled and said nothing. Chu Wanning was headstrong, Moran was love-struck, and sparks flew where their glares collided in mid-air. The atmosphere, which had only just eased up a bit, once again left them in a hopeless impasse. It's not like Chimay did anything wrong, said Moran. Shizun, can't you at least apologize for accidentally hurting him? Chu Wanning's eyes narrowed dangerously. Are you questioning me? No. Moran paused. I'm just upset that he was wrongfully injured, but didn't even get a sorry from Shizun. That's fair. I do feel like Chu Wanning needs to learn to apologize. Under the candlelight, the handsome youth finished dressing Chu Wanning's wounds and carefully tied the knot. The scene still seemed somewhat as tender as it had a moment ago, but by now their moods vastly differed. This was especially true for Chu Wanning, who felt like an entire jar of vinegar had toppled over inside his chest. The sour taste of jealousy swelled without stopping, seeping under his skin. Sorry? How do you even write sorry? Someone more apologetic, please teach me. That's him thinking it. It's gonna take at least half a year for that cut on his face to fade, Moran continued. But earlier, when I was helping him to apply medicine, he still said not to blame you, Shizun. It's true that he doesn't think you're at fault, but even so, do you really think you're in the right? His words only fueled the fire. Chu Wanning tried to and failed to bear it. He growled in a low voice, Get the hell out. Moran fell silent. Out! Chu Wanning snapped. Moran was thrown out, the door slamming in his face and nearly on his fingers. His hackles rose too. Look at that. Just look. What was Chu Wanning's problem? It was just an apology. That face of his sure was precious. How hard was it to simply say sorry? Even this venerable Emperor Tai Xianjun knew to apologize, but the mere Baidu immortal had to go and throw a hissy fit for no particular reason. No wonder no one wanted him, despite his handsome face. What a freaking waste was it, that was. He was gonna be single for life, and it served him right. I have mixed feelings about this because, again, I kind of agree with Moran that Chu Wanning does need to learn to apologize, and he can only grow as a person if he, like, not only acknowledges his faults, because he does seem to be aware of his own flaws, but also, like, works to improve them. But also, like, our dear Ta Xianjun is not want to talk. He has his own flaws that he really needs to work through, so Chu Wanning had closed the door in the face of the high and mighty Ta Xianjun, Emperor of the Mortal Realm, and paid him no heed. Obviously, he wouldn't just roll around outside the door like some shameless mutt. He was extremely persistent, clinging like a sticky candy and impossible to peel off. But the one he clung to was not his Shizun, but Shimei. He couldn't have cared less, and he immediately left to go keep Shimei company. Back already? The beauty Shimei was already lying down to rest when Moran came back. He paused before sitting up, long hair draped down his body. How is Shizun? He's just fine, and so is his temper. Shimei was quiet. Moran pulled up a chair and straddled it backwards, hands propped on its back, an indolent smile playing on his lips as he took in the sight of Shimei with his long, soft hair loose. Maybe I should go and check on him after all, said Shimei. Nah, don't do that to yourself, Moran rolled his eyes. He's pitching a fit right now. Did you make him mad again? Does he need someone else to make him mad? He can even get mad at himself. The guy's probably made of wood. He catches fire at the slightest spark. That's an interesting metaphor. Shimei shook his head, caught between laughing and crying. Go back to sleep, said Moran. I'm gonna go downstairs and borrow the kitchen to cook something for you. I'm plenty awake, Moran laughed. But if you don't want me to leave yet, I can keep you company till you fall asleep. Shimei hurriedly waved a hand. No need, he said gently. I won't be able to sleep with you here watching. You should try and get some rest too. Don't push yourself. Moran was a little dejected, and the smile on his lips went a little stiff. Shimei was kind to him, yet he always seemed to maintain a certain indiscernible distance. Shimei was right in front of him, but he was also like an illusion of the moon in the mirror, a flower reflecting in water, in sight but unattainable. Okay, Moran did his best to cheer up, forcing the smile back onto his face. He had a radiant smile, and he was silly to the point of being cute when he wasn't being mischievous. Just call out if you need anything. I'll be right next door. Or, if not, I'll be downstairs. Moran lifted a hand, wanting to pat Shimei's hair. He managed to restrain himself and turned his hand back around to scratch his own head instead. I'll be off then. Why can I so clearly imagine that image of like, oh yeah, no, it's totally cool. But also this is confusing me a little bit, him describing Shimei as being a little bit distant, and yet Shimei seemed so disappointed with Moran preferring the one food over the other. And like, you guys, if you've watched my other read-alongs, you'll know that I am convinced that Chu Wanning is behind the food that Moran always associates with Shimei. So if that's the case, like, just spitballing here, obviously no spoilers, but if he is disappointed for that reason, why would he be unless he also liked Moran? So that's what's confusing me, because from Moran's side it seems like Shimei's not interested, but from a more objective side it seems like he might be, and I don't know what to make of it. Um, Once outside, Moran couldn't resist a sneeze. He sniffled. Butterfly Town specialized in producing fragrances, and incense of all kinds was quite cheap, so the inn wasn't stingy about it. Long sticks of specialty incense burned in every room, one to keep out evil spirits, another to remove moisture, and a third to make the room smell nice. The smell of incense made Moran uncomfortable, but Shmei liked it, so he dealt with it. Downstairs, Moran swaggered over to the innkeeper and slid him a silver ingot. His eyes squinted into a smile. "Hey, innkeeper, do me a favor." At the sight of the silver ingot, the innkeeper's smile grew even more courteous. "What does the good Shizun need?" "I don't see many people here for breakfast anyway, so can I trouble you to turn away the other guests and lend me the kitchen for the morning?" Moran asked. How many coppers was a breakfast worth? Even half a month's worth of breakfast wouldn't earn a single silver ingot, so the innkeeper agreed eagerly, all smiles as he led Mowayu, still swaggering, to the inn's kitchen. Is Shenzhen going to cook himself? Why not have our chef take care of it? He's really good. No need, Moran grinned. Have you heard of the House of the Drunken Jade in Xiangtan? Yeah. Ah, the famed pleasure house that burned down a little over a year ago? The innkeepers peeked outside to make sure his wife was busy with work and not listening in before giving him a sneaky grin. Who hasn't heard of that place? It was the most famous establishment on the Xiang River, and it even produced a well-known courtesan whose name spread far and wide. Too bad it's too far away, or I'll go there to listen to her play too. Moran laughed. Well, thanks for the compliment on her behalf. On her behalf? Oh, he repeated. Okay. On her behalf? On her behalf? The innkeeper was puzzled. You know her or something? More than just know her, Moran replied. Wow. Wouldn't have known that just by looking at you, huh? But can you cultivators even Moran cut him off with a laugh. Besides the courtesan, do you know anything else? I heard the food there was also unparalleled. Moran's lips curved into a cheery grin as he picked up a kitchen knife with an air of familiarity. Before I was a cultivator, I worked as an assistant in the kitchen at the House of Drunken Jade for many years. Who do you think cooks better, me or your chef? That's very cocky of him, but it's interesting to learn like small pieces of his backstory that isn't really linked to sadness, shall we say? The innkeeper was even more amazed, stumbling over his words. Shenzhen is truly, he kept muttering truly, but couldn't find the words. Moran glanced at him sidelong, with a smug smile on his face and an air of self-assured laziness. All right, out you go then. This venerable chef's gonna get to work. I love how he just loves to toss the word venerable in wherever he can. I think if he could, he would fit it into like 50 words of a chapter title. The innkeeper had no idea he was currently speaking to the ex-Lord of Darkness, and shamelessly implored, I've long heard about the delicacies at the House of Drunken Jade. Perhaps when Shenzhen is done, the lowly one might ask to try some? He thought it was a small request, and that Moran would definitely agree. Who could have guessed that Moran's eyes would squint in an impish smile? You wanna try? Yeah. Keep dreaming, Moran humphed with an air of arrogance. Did you think this venerable one was going to cook just for anyone? He muttered, This is for Shimei. If not him, this venerable one wouldn't even stop into the kitchen. He picked out a radish and started cutting it as he continued muttering to himself. Thus shot down, the innkeeper could only stand awkwardly to the side, rubbing his hands and simpering for a while before quietly slipping away. Oh, that sounds so awkward. He also muttered to himself on the inside, what was all that with this venerable one? The boy was so young, he probably hadn't even formed a spiritual core yet. When you listened to him rambling on, it was Shimei this, Shimei that, but there hadn't been a single girl in his group. The innkeeper rolled his eyes. The boy had to be crazy, and not just a little crazy. Moran busied himself in the kitchen for 4 whole hours. It was nearly noon before he finished. He ran upstairs, expecting to wake up Shimei. His footsteps slowed as he passed Chu Wanning's room. Should he call him to eat too? When he recalled Chu Wanning's nasty temper, Moran frowned in distaste. Nope, he'd only made a little bit anyway. None for Chu Wanning. Okay, let me just quickly grab another sip. I feel bad for how, Moran keeps shunning Chu Wanning to the side, especially because we know Chu Wanning's feelings. And it's so difficult because I have to remind myself that from Moran's side, we have seen Chu Wanning treating him quite badly. But I think it's because, there's this very distinct feeling for me between Chu Wanning treating everybody, more or less at that level, whereas we know that Moran actively hates Chu Wanning, and so it doesn't feel quite equal. So I can't help but always want to side with and protect Chu Wanning, which I know probably isn't fair. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna do a little bit more, because it's almost time for the 10-minute break. Chapter 26. This venerable one's first meeting with him. Ooh, I wonder who him is. I feel bad for Chu Wanning. I feel bad that Chu Wanning's injured and Moran doesn't care. Yeah. Agreed. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and more people came by the inn to eat. Moran found it too noisy downstairs, so he had an attendant bring the dishes he'd made up to his room. In the end, he'd invited Chu Wanning as well. Moran was no emperor of the mortal realm for now, and his Shizun was therefore the highest ranking person present, so he had to play by the rules. 3 bowls of piping hot noodle soup sat on the square beach table. The smooth, chewy noodles had been handmade by Moran himself, and were much better than what you could buy anywhere else in town. Thick-cut slices of beef were piled on top, along with the fried sausage, fresh and tender pea shoots, plump maple cabbage, and golden yellow egg floss, the colorful ingredients arranged artfully. But the most noteworthy thing was not the succulent greens, the generous cuts of meat, or even the abundance of ingredients. It was the broth that had been simmering on low for 4 hours. The milky white broth had a layer of sesame chili oil on top of it. Moran had ground the hot, numbing spice himself in a stone mortar, and pestle? What's a pestle? And he had simmered them with the broth to produce a rich taste and tantalizing aroma. He had used copious, quite pleased with himself. Then just let me know whenever you want to eat it again. I'll make it for you. Shimei's eyes watered. His expression instantly grew worse, and he put his chopsticks down with a smack. Moeye, did you spill an entire jar of hot sauce into the soup? Moran paused and looked up, a noodle dangling from his mouth. He hadn't anticipated that the breakfast he worked so hard on would receive such harsh criticism. Chu Wanning, I'm slightly judging you right now. He blinked at Chu Wanning, bewildered, unable to believe his own ears for a moment before slipping down the noodles in his mouth. What? Chu Wanning was even less courteous this time. Is this even food for people? Is it even edible? Moran blinked several times before it finally clicked that the frick, sorry. Sorry about that. Moran blinked several times before it finally clicked that this idiot Chu Wanning was roasting him. How is it not food for people? He shot back indignantly. The space between Chu Wanning's brows twitched. It's utterly unpalatable. Moran choked. Whatever anyone said, his skills had indeed been sneakily learned from the best of the best at the House of Drunken Jade. Shizun, aren't you being a little too picky? Shimei also piped up. Shizun, you haven't eaten for a whole day. Even if you don't like it, you should still try to eat some. Chu Wanning stood up and said coldly, I don't eat spicy food. Then he turned and left. The two left at the table fell into an awkward silence. Shimei was dumbfounded. Shizun doesn't eat spicy food? How come I didn't know that? Aran, did you know this? Moran stared blankly for a while at the noodles that Chu Wanning had left basically untouched, then nodded. I didn't know. That was a lie. Moran knew that Chu Wanning couldn't eat spicy food. It was just that he'd forgotten. He had been entangled with this person for the greater part of his previous life, after all. He knew exactly what foods Chu Wanning liked and disliked, but he hadn't bothered to keep those details in mind, so he hadn't remembered. Why is that breaking my heart? Oh my word. Chu Wanning returned to his room and lay down, still dressed. He faced the wall with his eyes wide open, unable to sleep. Between how much blood he'd lost, the spiritual energy he'd expended, and the fact that he hadn't had a single bite to eat since the day before, he felt awful. The man didn't know how to take care of himself at all. He was in a bad mood, so he simply didn't eat, as if he could fill his stomach with anger instead. He didn't know what he was angry about, or rather, he didn't want to know. But in the silence, a face appeared before his unfocused eyes. Lip corners curled softly into a spirited smile, light flickering in a pair of clear black eyes that were gentle with a hint of purple. Warm and comfortable and somewhat lazy. Chu Wanning gripped the blanket, finger joints going white from the strength of his grip. He didn't want to sink into the vision, and he closed his eyes in an attempt to escape that face and its careless laughter. But the past surged forward even more strongly with his eyes closed, and it washed over him like a tide. Oh my word, guys, what are we about to learn? Okay, no, I think we need to stop it here for the 10-minute break, because once we start with this, I don't want to, interrupt it. And it is on the dot, more or less, 5 here, so I'm quickly gonna go make myself a cup of coffee, and then we will get back to reading. But it's kind of breaking my soul how big the gap is between Moran and Chu Wanning, and I just want to get to the part where it gets better, but also I know that reading the struggle is what makes them starting to understand each other so much more fulfilling. So we're just gonna struggle through. But anyway, I'll see you guys in 10 minutes. Okay, we are back. Oh, I can't believe I actually managed to make coffee in the time that we had the break. Because I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do it, but we're gonna try, and I managed. So yay! Sorry, I love coffee, so I felt it necessary. But anyway, let's quickly find the page. Okay, I'm low key very scared. I'm very excited about finding out a bit more of how Chu Wanning views MORAN. The first time he met MORAN had been in front of the heaven-piercing tower on Shizun Peak. The sun was fierce that day, and all 12 elders were present, talking among themselves in low voices. The Yuheng elder was an exception, naturally. He wasn't so foolish as to stand over there with the rest of them to bake in the sun. Instead, he stood under a flowering tree by himself, preoccupied with examining the flexibility of the newly made black metal claw on his hand. Of course, he himself had no need for such things. He was forging these claws for the lower-level disciples of Shizun Peak. The lower cultivation realm bordered the ghost realm, and so it was often dangerous to transverse. It wasn't uncommon for the lower-level disciples to get injured or even to lose their lives. Chu Wanning never said anything about it, but he had been trying to work out a solution. He wanted to make a weapon that was light and nimble, and easy to learn. The others stood by the side, chattering. "Did you hear? The long-lost nephew of the sect leader was barely saved from a fire. No one else survived when the place burned down. If the sect leader had been even a step lower, his nephew probably would have turned to ashes too. It was truly a stroke of luck. Must have been his late father protecting him from the other side. It's heartbreaking that he was separated so young and went through so many hardships. Ugh. The child's name is MORAN. He's 15 years old, right? It's time for him to receive a courtesy name then. Does he have one?" "Shenji, elder. The child grew up in a brothel. He's lucky to even have a name, much less a courtesy name." "I heard the sect leader already thought of a couple, and is just choosing between them now. Wonder what he's going to pick in the end." That's interesting. I kind of didn't think this was a detail that we would get to find out about the courtesy, like him being around, or like, how should I put it? But basically, him sort of knowing MORAN before the courtesy name was even chosen, and all of that. Okay. "The sect leader sure does value this nephew of his. You don't say? It isn't just the sect leader either. Even the madam dotes on him endlessly. Huh. Probably the only person in the entire Shizun Peak who's displeased is our very own darling of the heavens." Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite surprised considering he basically grew up as like an only child type setup, and that makes him, obviously he still would be more or less, but suddenly it's not just him in the spotlight. "Tanlang, elder, you mustn't speak with such indiscretion." "Haha, my mistake, I slipped. But our darling of the heavens runs wild and pays little mind to propriety, disrespects his elders, and lazes about idly all day, with an air of born entitlement. He really does lack discipline." "Tanlang, elder, how much have you had to drink today?" The person at his side gave him a meaningful look, gesturing with his chin towards Chu Wanning, who was standing a distance away. The implication was obvious. The darling of the heavens, Shimeng, was Chu Wanning's disciple. To say that Shimeng lacked discipline was indirectly insulting Chu Wanning's instruction. The Yuheng elder was composed and refined in appearance, as if he was above matters of the mortal realm, and graced with a lofty air. But everyone knew that his volatile temperament knew of his volatile temperament. If anyone rubbed him the wrong way, they might as well just wash their necks clean and wait for death by whipping. I don't know why that description always amuses me. Chu Wanning heard every word of their gossip, but he paid them no mind. He had far more interest in the decorative patterns on the metal claw on his fingers than he did in what others had to say about him. Speaking of which, the finger claw was pretty good, but it wasn't quite tough enough. There were some demons with whose thick hides it might not be able to rip through. Not in one strike. He would try adding more dragon bone powder when he got back. That would help. When the other elders saw Chu Wanning neglect to react, they relaxed a little and resumed their chatter. The sect leader probably summoned all of us here today in order to pick a teacher for Mogongze, huh? That's strange. Why doesn't the sect leader teach the boy himself? Supposedly, his little nephew's aptitude is incompatible with the sect leader's cultivation method, someone mumbled. But even then, isn't it a bit much to gather all the elders for a young master to pick and choose from? The Lucan elder let out a soft sigh and brushed aside his smooth, graceful long hair. My humble self feels like a cheap Napa cabbage right now, he bemoaned, laid out in the store for little Mogongze to pick. Flabbergasted, silence fell. Would that fop mind not I've never heard the word fop. What is that? Would that mind not... Oh, okay, sorry. This sentence is weird. Would that fop mind not blurting out the whole truth without hint of finesse? They waited for quite a while before the sect leader finally came. He walked up to the 1,000 steps to arrive before the heaven-piercing tower, a youth trailing behind him. Chu Wanning only glanced over briefly and didn't even bother to get a clear eyeful before looking away to continue examining his finger claw. He spared no second glance. Shizun Peak's procedure for seeking apprenticeship under a teacher was well and truly unconventional. In every other sect, the teacher was high and mighty and would rest their hand on some new disciple's head while saying, "Young man, your aptitude is satisfactory. Henceforth, you shall be my disciple." The disciple wouldn't even get a chance to say no. Or the teacher would wave his sleeve with a face of cold derision and declare, "Young man, your forehead is too big, your eyes dull, and the back of your skull protrudes too far. It is not the proper appearance for my sect. You and I are not fated to be, and I will not accept you as my disciple." That sounds so pompous. Sorry to say. The disciple wouldn't even get a chance to prove himself before the teacher would zoom away on his sword, hightailing it out of there faster than a dog. Things were different here on Shizun Peak. The teacher and disciple mutually chose one another. What did that mean? Shizun Peak had 20 elders. When a new disciple entered the sect, they should first spend a period of time living alongside everyone and weighing their options before delivering a letter of intent to an elder, expressing their hope to seek apprenticeship. If the elder accepted, then everything worked out perfectly. If the elder declined, the disciple would continue battering them until either the elder gave in or the disciple gave up. That's so interesting to find out that technically MORAN, or at least by this logic, it means that MORAN chose Chu Wanning and Chu Wanning accepted. Which is so sad to think about how much their relationship would have had then deteriorated if that was the starting point. Okay. By all appearances, Chu Wanning was exceptionally skilled and handsome to boot, so one would expect his front yard to be filled to the brim at all hours of the day with hopeful disciples relentlessly pursuing him as a teacher. But the reality was far different. Chu Wanning's appearance was elegant, but his temper was so bad that it made people's hair stand on end. Rumor had it that when he got angry, what? Sorry, let me just. Really? Rumor had it that when he got angry, he would whip female disciples like one would male disciples, and that he would drown male disciples directly in a pond. Not many people were brave enough for this kind of Shizun. Thus, the Yuheng elder's residence was quiet and lonesome. Other than the darling of heavens, Shumeng, and Shumeng's close friend, Shimei, he had never accepted any other disciples. Everyone else preferred to call him a respectful elder over an intimate Shizun. Chu Wanning wore a removed expression and insisted that he wasn't bothered by this at all. His head was lowered as he continued to tinker with the ice-cold weapon in his hand, as if he couldn't have cared less. Everything he designed, from the hidden sleeve weapons to the emergency whistles, was for others. The sooner he finished working on things, the sooner more people would be able to avoid suffering. Moments like this is what really gets me to fall in love with Chu Wanning, is that he clearly cares so much, and yet he really doesn't show it. So he didn't expect it at all when Moran chose him without hesitation. At that moment, his brow was furrowed as he stroked the thorns on the finger claw, pondering over how to improve them. He wasn't paying attention to what the sect leader and everyone else was saying. Without him realizing it, everything had grown quiet. Only once he thought of a potential improvement did Chu Wanning notice that his surroundings, which had been buzzing with conversation a moment ago, seemed a little too quiet. So he finally pulled his gaze away from the finger claw and looked up with some impatience and confusion. That was when he saw a face so brilliantly lit by the sun as to be nearly dazzling. A handsome youth, head tilted backwards, was looking up at him. The corners of the youth's lips were curled into a faint, carefree smile, and a marked pair of dimples decorated his cheeks. His demeanor was lively as the smoky, fiery atmosphere of a marketplace, yet he had a hint of gullous innocence. I know that word, but I don't know how to pronounce it. A pair of purple-tinted black eyes stared unblinkingly at him, filled with fervor and a curiosity both. He was new, and, not knowing the rules, stood so close that it was almost impudent. Someone appearing so suddenly right in front of him startled Chu Wanning, and he reflexively stepped backwards as if burned. The back of his head met the trunk of the tree with a thump. The youth's eyes widened slightly. Ah. Why do I kind of like the fact that Chu Wanning was so taken aback by Moran? An awkward silence fell between Chu Wanning and the youth. "What are you doing?" said Chu Wanning. The youth grinned. "Xianjun, Xianjun, I've been watching you for ages already. Why won't you pay attention to me?" Guys! Oh no! That's too cute, and that's not gonna last, and it's breaking my heart. Okay. I'm assuming, maybe that's just me, but I am assuming that the scene that was just described, where is it, is more or less this. Like, can you guys even see it? And let me first put the bookmark back. This bit. I'm assuming this is the scene. Okay. Chapter 27. This venerable one will make you a bowl of noodles. Will he really? Chu Wanning's head reeled. It was his own fault for being too preoccupied and not keeping his guard up while at Shizun Peak, to the point that he hadn't even noticed that someone had come so close. What was happening? Where had this kid come from? Ah, wait, was he that Mo something? Mo what again? Mo Shao? Mo Ju? Mo Yu? With practiced ease, he arranged his expression into one of "Strangers, do not approach," and quickly swept the startle and fluster from his phoenix eyes, replacing it with his customary stately standoffishness. He was just about to open his mouth and deliver a scolding out of habit when his hand was grabbed. Chu Wanning was flabbergasted. All his life no one had ever dared to casually grab him by the wrist in such a way. He was frozen in place for a moment, face dark, with no idea how to react. Oh, okay. Rip his hand away, followed by a backhand slap? But then all he'd need to do would be to yell, "Molester," and he'd be the very image of an offended lady. Oh my word, okay. So, rip his hand away and no slap? But then wouldn't he seem a little too easygoing? Chu Wanning was still frozen with indecision when the youth grinned. "What's this on your hand? It's so pretty. Do you teach disciples how to make this stuff? Everyone else has already introduced themselves, and you're the only one who hasn't said anything yet. Which elder are you? Ah, is your head okay from hitting the tree just now?" If Chu Wanning's head hadn't hurt before, it did now, after being pummeled with so many questions in a row. His head throbbed like it was about to split open. In his agitation, a faint golden glow began to gather in his other hand, signaling Tianwen's impending appearance. The other elders were horror-struck. Was Chu Wanning out of his mind? Would he dare to whip even more Gongzi? But MORAN grabbed that hand too. Now the youth had captured both of Chu Wanning's hands. MORAN had no idea just how much danger he was in, and he stood before Chu Wanning, holding his hands and looking up with a smiling face. "I'm MORAN. I don't know anyone here, but based on faces alone, I like you best." Of course you do. Oh my word, this man. "How about you be my teacher?" No one had anticipated this turn of events, and they all grew even more horrified. A few of the elders' faces looked as if they had turned to stone and cracked in half. "Huh?" said the Xianji elder. "Wow!" said the poor Jun elder. "Oh?" said the Sha elder. Said the Jielu elder. "Ha, this is hilarious," said the Tanlang elder. The Lucan elder, in full foppish glory, twirled a strand of hair around a finger and batted his peach blossom eyes. "Aya, the little Gongzi sure is bold. Truly young and courageous, to dare grope even the Yuheng elder's ass." I don't think that's quite what he was doing. "Could you please not say it so nauseatingly?" said the Chisha elder said with disdain. The Lucan elder gracefully rolled his eyes, humming, I'll say it in a more refined manner then. Truly young and courageous, to dare grope even the Yuheng elder's derriere." The Qishang elder was silent. Just kill him and be done with it. Oh my word. Okay, that I did not expect. Out of all the elders, the kind and gentle Xianji elder was the most popular. His cultivation method was easy to learn, and he was magnanimous and upstanding, so most of Shizun Peak's disciples studied under him. Chu Wanning had thought that Moran would be no exception. Even if he didn't choose the Xianji elder, he would definitely go for the forthright and spirited Purjun elder. In any case, whomever Moran chose, it surely wouldn't be himself. But it was Chu Wanning whom Moran stood in front of, Moran who was merely inches away, face full of intimacy and fondness, things with which Chu Wanning was wholly unfamiliar with. He felt like out of the blue he'd been designated the role of comic relief, and he found himself flustered for no reason at all, and at a complete loss for what to do. Chu Wanning only knew how to deal with respect, fear, and loathing. Something like fondness was far too difficult. He rejected Moran immediately and without thinking. Moran stood in place, stunned, and a pair of eyes under those long lashes unexpectedly dejected, utterly undeterred. He thought about it for a long while, and with his head down, then mumbled stubbornly in a small voice, "Well, it's gonna be you anyway." Chu Wanning had no words. The sect leader watched from the side with amusement, and couldn't resist laughing. "Aran, do you even know who he is?" "How could I know? He hasn't told me." "Ah, if you don't even know who he is, then why are you so set on him?" Moran, still holding on Chu Wanning's hands, turned and answered with a smile, "'Cause he looks the gentlest and most easy-going, of course." My sweet summer child, you couldn't have misjudged someone more. In the darkness, Chu Wanning's eyes flew open abruptly, vision swimming. What the actual hell? What exactly had been wrong with Moran's eyes back then, to find him gentle? Chu Wanning wasn't alone in wondering either. The entirety of Shizun Peak had heard of the incident, and everyone had looked at Moran Gongze with concerned expressions of "what a foolish child." Chu Wanning lifted a hand to press against his throbbing temple. His shoulder hurt, his thoughts were a mess, and his stomach was empty, and his head was dizzy. The snap wasn't happening. He starfished on the bed in a daze for a while. Before sitting up, he was just about to light a stick of incense to help calm himself down when knocks came from the door again. It was Moran. Chu Wanning ignored it, but he didn't say "get the hell in" or "get the hell out." However, this time the door opened by itself. Chu Wanning lifted his head gloomily, but the already lit match beside his fingers paused in mid-air without touching the incense, and after a while went out by itself. "Get the hell out," said Chu Wanning. Moran got the hell in. Why am I enjoying that so much? Hi. Yeah, it is so, like, it's freaking hilarious that he totally misjudged Chu Wanning like that. But I kind of secretly want Chu Wanning to become that once he starts receiving affection, because I think the part of the problem is a little bit the fact that he clearly hasn't received a lot of affection himself, so he doesn't know how to deal with it. And he doesn't know how to give it either. He had a bowl of steaming noodles in his hands, freshly made. It was simpler this time. Plain noodles in pure white broth, sprinkled with chopped onions and white sesame seeds, some pork spare ribs on top, napa cabbage, and a poached egg lightly crisped around the edges. Guys, I can't be getting hungry right now. Chu Wanning was starving, but his face remained impassive. He looked at the noodles, looked at Moran, then turned his face away without saying a word. Moran set the bowl down on the table and said softly, "I had the inn's cook make these noodles." Chu Wanning lowered his lashes. Of course Moran hadn't made it himself. Why is that breaking my heart? Go away, damn. Try to eat some, Moran said. The bowl isn't spicy, and there's no beef or pea shoots. Then he left, closing the door on his way out. He felt bad about Chu Wanning's injury, but this was about all he could do. Inside the room, Chu Wanning sat by the window, lost in thought, his arms crossed as he stared at this bowl of spare rib noodles from far away, until the steam disappeared and the noodles grew cold, with no hint of warmth remaining. Only then did he finally walk over and sit down to pick up the cold, congealed noodles with chopsticks and slowly began to eat it. Does this man enjoy punishing himself? Or does he not feel he deserves the kind version of things? Because at this point I feel like it could be either. And I get his disappointment over Moran not cooking the dish himself, but I mean, at the same time, Moran did go out of his way to bring him food and get the cook to make it and everything like that, so he did try, even if it wasn't the gesture that Chu Wanning obviously wanted. And so the case of the haunting of the Chim family came to its conclusion. The next day, the group retrieved their black horses from the boarding stables and headed back to the sect along the same road they'd taken to the mission. All over Butterfly Town, from the tea stands to the food stalls, everyone was talking about what had occurred with the Chim family. In such a middling settlement, a scandal like this would be the talk of the town for at least a year. Who would have thought that Chingongzi had already married Miss Luo behind closed doors? Ah, poor Miss Luo. At least these people have some compassion for her, damn. I mean, maybe, but that seems like that kind of, to me, goes against the description of the noodles. Like, you would think that if he genuinely liked the noodles cold, it wouldn't be such a distasteful description of, oh, the congealed noodles, you know. If you ask me, this wouldn't have happened if the Chins hadn't struck it rich. You really can't let men get rich, or they'll let all their worst impulses off the leash to destroy the whole city. But in this case, it wasn't even Chen Bo-huan who did that. One man on hearing that was rather dissatisfied. Chen Gongzi did nothing wrong. It was all on his parents. I hope that bastard landlord Chen's future kids and grandkids are born without butts, basically. The dead are pitiful for sure, but what about the living? Said someone else. Look at Madame Qing Yao, treasured daughter of the Yao family. She got the shortest end of the stick, no matter how you look at it. That old black-hearted Chinmat swindled the poor girl. What should she even do now? Remarry, of course. The person rolled his eyes, scoffing. Remarry? Would you take her? I really don't like that, because not only does it imply that there's something wrong with her, which obviously we know how the old times was about people who had already married once, but also the way that he's like being judgmental about the other guy for like, oh, you wouldn't marry her, but it also sounds like he's saying like, oh, but I also wouldn't marry her, so I'm judging you for not marrying her, but I'm also being hypocritical about it because I also wouldn't marry her. The peasant who got scoffed at grinned toothily, picking at the gap between his teeth. If my woman's fine with it, then sure, why not? Miss Yao's real pretty, so I ain't gonna mind the widow thing. Puh, keep dreaming. Even as second-hand goods, she's way out of your league. Just gonna put that aside, 'cause we know it's wrong. Moran's Moran's ears perked up from where he sat on his horse, energetically listening here and peering there. If not for Chu Wanning, with his eyes closed and brows furrowed, too damn noisy, all but written on his face, Moran might have even scooted over to join in on the gossip. Riding side by side, they finally made it out of the town proper and arrived at the outskirts. Chimay let out a surprised noise and pointed off in the distance. Shizun, look over there. A large group of farmers in coarse clothes were gathered in front of the destroyed temple, busily ferrying bricks around. They seemed intent on rebuilding the temple and reconstructing the statue of the ghost mistress of ceremonies. Shizun, the previous ghost mistress is gone, but they're making another, Chimay said, worried. Will this one cultivate into a deity and cause trouble too? I don't know, said Chu Wanning. Should we go and talk them out of it? Butterfly Town's ghost marriage tradition has been around for generations. It's not the sort of thing that can be changed by anything we say. Let's leave it. I mean, if we think about the fact that it took generations for the deity to come alive, then probably, like, obviously, as Chu Wanning said, they're not going to be able to convince them not to do it. And by the time that the next deity is cultivated, they're probably going to have passed away themselves. So, yeah, anyway. Yeah, they do talk about her like she's a sack of rice. It's really frustrating. Then he set off on a trot, clouds of dust trailing behind him. It was evening by the time they got to Shizun Peak. At the main gate, Chu Wanning instructed his disciples, both of you, go report to Loyalty Hall. I will go to this discipline court. Moran didn't understand. What are you going there for? But worry was written plain on Chimay's face. Chu Wanning's face was impassive. To receive punishment. The saying went that a crime was a crime, whether committed by a peasant or an emperor, but which emperor had ever actually been thrown in jail to await beheading for killing a man? It was no different in the cultivation realm. A transgression was a transgression, whether committed by a disciple or an elder. These were empty words in the vast majority of sects. In reality, an elder who committed a transgression might at most write an apology letter. Which idiot would actually go and obediently receive their round of whipping, or some dozen strikes? That was why the Jielu elder's face was green by the time he finished listening to Chu Wanning's confession. No, it's just that, you Hung elder, you really hit the client? Chu Wanning replied mildly. You're really too... Chu Wanning looked up to shoot him a glare. The Jielu elder shut up. In accordance with the rules, the punishment of this transgression is 200 strikes, 3 days of protracted kneeling in the Yanlu hole, and 3 months of confinement, Chu Wanning stated. I do not dispute the transgression, and I am prepared to receive the punishment. Okay, my dude, I respect you like wanting to accept punishment for wrongdoings, but your shoulder is still messed up. It's probably still infected as well. I don't know if you're in the best state right now to be receiving your punishment and be able to survive it. I'm just saying. Dumbfounded, the Jielu elder glanced left and right, then curled his finger. The doors to the disciple court closed with a thud, leaving only two of them standing face to face in silence. "What is the meaning of this?" said Chu Wanning. "How do I say this? Yuheng elder, it's not like you don't know. The rules may be rules, but they don't really apply to you. The doors are closed. This stays between you and I. What say we just let it slide? If I actually strike you as the sect leader finds out, he'll have my old hide." Chu Wanning didn't feel like wasting his breath, so he simply said, "I hold others to the rules, and I will hold myself to the same." Then he knelt down there in the hall, facing the plaque above the door that read, "Discipline. Carry out the punishment." Yeah, no, I didn't think he was going to be very happy with the suggestion that he just kind of like leave it. And I admire him for it, but also I have this sad feeling that if they continue to refuse his demand to receive punishment, that he will find a way to inflict it on himself. And I really hope that it doesn't come to that, because I feel like he would do it. Okay, let me just grab a little bit of coffee, and then we can move on to the next chapter. Oh goodness, where did the hour go? Damn, I so badly wanted to reach 300 pages, but there's still 10 left before that, and I don't think we're gonna be able to do that in 10 minutes. I'm not good enough. Chapter 28. This venerable one's mind is a bit of a mess. The news that the Yuheng elder was being punished for breaking the rules spread as if it had sprouted a pair of wings. It didn't even wait until the next morning. Practically everyone in the sect found out the very night. The 200 strikes would probably kill an ordinary person. Even for a cultivator, it would be quite unbearable. Shimeng jumped to his feet when he heard that. What? Shizun went to the discipline hall? "Young master, please hurry and talk to the sect leader. Shizun is already injured. How can he possibly endure 200 strikes? Thank you, that's what I was thinking." Shimeng was so anxious he was about to lose it. "My dad? That won't do. He's still not back from Tashue Palace. A message by bird won't reach him until tomorrow at the earliest. Why didn't you guys stop Shizun?" Moran and Shimei exchanged a glance. Stop Chu Wanning? Who in the world was capable of that? Damn it, I'm gonna go after him right now. Shimeng dashed off towards the discipline court. He hadn't even entered the courtyard when he spotted a group of the Jielu elder's disciples crowded around the door to the main hall, whispering among themselves. "What are you all doing? Standing there? Get out of my way! Move! Young master!" "Ah, the young master is here. Make way for the young master." The disciples quickly parted to the side to let Shimeng through. The doors of Clear Sky Hall stood open, and Chu Wanning knelt inside with his back straight and eyes closed, not speaking a word. The Jielu elder, holding a metal rod, was reading the rules of Shisheng Peak aloud, each rule accompanied by one brutal strike of the metal rod to Chu Wanning's back. 200 is so much. I'm sorry, I just need to... Like, that's kind of ridiculous. I feel like Again, most people wouldn't survive it, they told us. Oh, goodness, okay. The 91st rule of the sect: do not injure the innocent, and do not use cultivator techniques against common people. Under the rod, do you have any complaints? No complaints. The 92nd rule of the sect: do not act rashly of one's own accord, and do not indulge in self-gratification. Under the rod, do you have any complaints? No complaints. The Jelu elder didn't dare go easy in the punishment. 90 or so strikes in, and Chu Wanning's white robes were soaked through with blood. Shimeng held Chu Wanning in the highest esteem. His eyes went instantly bloodshot at the sight, and he called out at the top of his lungs, "Shizun!" Chu Wanning pretended not to hear. His eyes remained closed, a slight furrow between his eyebrows. The Jelu elder glanced over at the door and said quietly, "Yuheng elder, the young master is here." "I'm not deaf," I heard. Blood trickled out from the corner of Chu Wanning's lips, but he still did not look up. "He's just being a noisy child. Pay him no mind." The Jelu elder sighed. "Yuheng, is this really necessary?" This is so painful. Can they not? "It can't be helped that my disciples are always being disobedient." Chu Wanning spoke lightly. "If I do not receive my due punishment today, how will I have the face to discipline anyone else in the future?" The Jelu elder hesitated. "Please continue." The Jelu elder sighed again. He looked at Chu Wanning's pale, delicate neck, exposed above his open collar, curved down gently, like the mist, and couldn't help but suggest, "Then I'll at least go a little easier." That would be no different from deception," Chu Wanning said. "Don't worry. It's just 200 strikes. I can handle it." "Yeah, sure." Yuheng elder, Jelu, there is no need to say more. Continue." The metal rod fell once again. Even Shumeng's voice became distorted. "Jelu elder, you still won't frickin' stop? Have you no regard for your young master? That's my Shizun you're hitting. My Shizun!" The Jelu elder could only force himself to pretend not to hear. Shumeng's lungs were about to explode from anger. "Have you gone deaf? You crappy old man! Your young master is ordering you to stop. If you dare hit him again, I... He got stuck on "I" and couldn't think of what to say. He was only a 15-year-old youth after all. Darling of the heavens or not, his strength and status were far below that of the elders. Ultimately, red-faced, he could only choke out an obstinate, "I'll tell my dad." You go do that, yes. Oh my word. Okay, sorry. The Julu elder did not dignify that with a response. Chu Wanning let out a nearly imperceptible sigh. 97 strikes, 98 strikes, 99 strikes, 100 strikes. Even the fabric of his clothes were ripped by the strikes. The blood was appallingly red. Shimeng couldn't handle any more. Eyes red with panic, he made to recklessly charge into the hall, but Chu Wanning suddenly opened his eyes and brandished a hand. A barrier instantly split the space in two, blocking off the door and forcing Shimeng to back away several steps, nearly falling to the ground. Chu Wanning coughed up blood, and as he glanced around, his narrowed phoenix eyes as fierce as lightning. "Disrespectful. Go back where you came from." "Shizun! Since when has Shizun Peak's young master been entitled to order the Julu elder to bend the rules?" Chu Wanning said harshly. Hurry up and get lost. Shumeng stared at him, wide-eyed, a wet shimmer to his gaze. Moran stood to the side, stroking his chin, the corner of his lips still slightly curled. Aya, oh no, the little phoenix is gonna cry. I mean, me too, Moran, don't judge. At these words, Shumeng whipped his head around and glared at Moran. His eyes were rimmed in red, but he stubbornly refused to let the tears fall. He didn't complain and didn't talk back. He only crawled up from the ground and dusted himself off with his head lowered and teeth gritted, then knelt facing the clear sky hall. Shizun, this disciple was wrong. Chu Wanning was still taking the strikes, back held the ramrod straight, and never once bending, but his face was pale, and a sheen of cold sweat covered his forehead. But I'm not leaving, Shumeng continued stubbornly. I'm going to keep Shizun company. Having said that, he knelt and refused to get up. Moran's eyes were about to roll out of their sockets. Shumeng, Shu Ziming, darling of the heavens, would only lower himself to this extent in front of Chu Wanning. He was a phoenix to everyone else, but a quail to his Shizun. If Moran hadn't been so certain that Shumeng had no interest in men, he'd probably wondered if he had a crush on Chu Wanning, to be so hell-bent and without regret. If his Shizun were to slap him, the little quail would humbly turn the other cheek. All right, brown-noser extraordinaire. His heart felt contempt, but for some reason his mouth tasted sour. Moran glared at Shumeng for a while, growing more agitated the longer he looked. He couldn't let him be the only one to show devotion. Mister, I hate my Shizun with everything in me and definitely don't feel anything close to like or love. Oh, goodness. But also, can he really judge Shumeng? Because he is exactly the same when it comes to Shumeng. Now, granted, he did say that, like, obviously, it's because he likes Shumeng, while Shumeng more just has a fierce devotion to Chu Wanning, but still. Chu Wanning already didn't like Moran. After the trick that Shumeng was pulling, wouldn't he be even more biased in the future? Yeah, sure, keep telling yourself that's why you're doing this. And so, Moran knelt as well, next to Shumeng. I'll keep Shizun company too. Naturally, Shumeng followed suit, and all three disciples knelt outside the barrier, waiting. On hearing the news, the other elders' disciples all found some excuse or another to come to the discipline court to watch the show. Heavens! How could it be Yuheng Elder? I heard he beat up a common person in a fit of rage. Ah, so scary. Shh, quiet. If the Yuheng Elder hears, you'll be the next one. Be next on the whipping block. Why did I read it like that? Sorry, my brain divided it into two words because it had like a I don't know what you call it, but it went over into the next paragraph, so it had that hyphen, I think, and so I read it as whipping instead of whipping. The whipping block. There we go. Okay, my brain can work, I promise. But why is your young master kneeling? Someone else asked. Mogungze too. Moran was handsome and charming, and he had earned the favor of countless female disciples, just going about his daily life. Quite a few of the onlookers felt sorry for him and whispered to each other. Poor Mogungze, what to do? Should we go and make a plea on his behalf? We probably shouldn't meddle in their master discipline affairs. You can go if you have the guts, but I don't want to die yet. Did you already forget that one Shiji who got whipped, like a couple 100 times, by the Yuheng Elder? Silence reigned. The 200 strikes finished. the barrier was finally withdrawn. Shumeng scurried up from the ground and stumbled frantically into the clear sky hall. When he got close enough to see Chu Wanning's condition, he let out a furious "Ah!" and spun to grab the Julu elder by the collar. "You crappy old man," he snarled. "Don't you frickin' know to at least hold back? Did you not hear him say that, like, he shouldn't hold back? Like, Chu Wanning ordering him not to hold back?" Shizun, Chu Wanning's eyes were closed, his blood-stained lips opening and closing, but his hoarse voice was commanding. Shumeng's joints cracked audibly as he released the Julu elder and shoved him aside. Moran arrived at that moment, still smiling, thinking that the Julu elder must definitely have held back in consideration of Chu Wanning's status. But when he looked down at Chu Wanning's condition, that smile froze on his face. Is it bad of me that I kind of am glad that he's being disillusioned? Had Chu Wanning seriously not told Jelu elder about the injury on his shoulder? The majority of those 200 strikes had been landing unsparingly on that injury. New wounds on top of the old. Chu Wanning, have you lost your mind? Moran's pupils contracted, a tidal wave of intense loathing washing over him. Is this man confusing, like, concern and loathing? Because it kind of seems like it. He didn't know what exactly it was that he loathed, or just what he was so angry about, only that a rage inferno was soaring through his stomach and burning through all of his organs. Okay, I know that it is time, but I think I'm just quickly gonna finish this chapter because we have like 1.5 pages left, if you guys don't mind. And also, before we do that, again, some beautiful art for you guys to just quickly appreciate. Oh my word. He was used to Chu Wanning being tormented to the breaking point at his own hands, as Moran crushed his dignity and defiled his purity. Oh yeah, then that's fine. But Moran couldn't stand Chu Wanning being bruised and scarred at the hands of anyone else. Maybe it was because he couldn't forget that what had happened in his previous lifetime. But Moran subconsciously felt like this person belonged to him. I don't have time to unpack that right now. He originally hadn't minded that Chu Wanning was to be punished. He thought that he was an elder. The 200 strikes definitely wouldn't be made with any real force, or at the very least, the strikes would avoid the yet unhealed wounds on his shoulder. But Chu Wanning hadn't said a thing about it. He hadn't said anything at all. What was this crazy person being so stubborn about? Why was he forcing himself through all this? What the hell was this stupid idiot trying to prove? Head a complete mess, Moran lifted a hand to support Chu Wanning, but Shumeng had beaten him to it and was already helping Chu Wanning up. Don't ruin my ship, Shumeng, like, damn it. Moran's hand paused in mid-air, then after a while lowered back down. He watched them walk away, Shumeng supporting Chu Wanning, an unknown feeling in his chest. He wanted to follow, but he couldn't move his feet. Everything that happened in his previous lifetime was in the past. Now Chu Wanning was only his Shizun. None of these muddled, hateful, tender entanglements had occurred. He shouldn't be entertaining these thoughts. It didn't matter to him who hit Chu Wanning, who supported him, who he spent time with, or even if someone killed him. None of it had anything to do with Moran. Shmei walked beside him. Come on, let's go with them and take a look. I'll pass. Shmei has it covered. I can't help anyway. And too many people will just add to the mess. Moran's expression didn't change, but his mind was in disarray. He really truly could not understand what it was that he felt at this moment. Was it hate? Oh, that is a lot to unpack. That is so much to unpack, and I don't have the time right now, unfortunately. But that is the end of chapter 29, and miraculously, even though it wasn't quite done in 2 hours, we did reach 300, like page 300. So we only have a little over 200 left, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Let me check. Oh my word, the terminology pages are so many. I appreciate there's a pronunciation guide. Damn, I should probably look into that. Because I don't know how on point my pronunciations have been, unfortunately. Okay, so there are... Yeah, we only have 200 pages left. I can't believe that. That's kind of insane. I didn't think it would go so quickly. I know maybe it's not feeling quickly for everybody else, but for me it feels like it's flying by. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you guys so much for tagging along again. And yeah, we should be back to like normal scheduled time next week. It was just today because I have to be somewhere in a little less than an hour's time, and it takes about half an hour to drive there. So yeah, I need to rush to go. But I am gonna wait like the 2 seconds that it takes for the live to catch up with what I'm saying. So I will say goodbye. I hope you guys have an amazing week, and I'll see you guys again next week. ZHANG.